Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today, got the fabulous Daniel Trevor with me, and I'm going to ask a slightly different take on the normal question. And all I'm going to say is, hey, Daniel, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey there. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love getting this story out. Well, about 5 years ago, I had a heart attack and I almost died. And it was a complete and total shocker to me because I was a slim, symptom-free Mr. Healthy, or so I thought. And, so having studied technical data throughout my life, I decided to take a dive into the science to find out how could this happen to me. And what I discovered absolutely blew my mind, shocked and infuriated me. And I thought, oh my God, that what they've been telling us to eat for decades is killing us. And, because I had 4 comorbidities, which I'll tell you about. And it was just wild that my trusted doctors missed all of them. And that's because they don't do the right testing, which I can get into too. And so it really, after that happened, what I did was I went to Google University and YouTube University and PubMed and all these books and studies, and I just immersed myself there. And so, and I saw one of your interviews with Ivor Cummins, and oh my God, he was one of the guys that I had first seen, and he was very impressive. And my knowledge is dwarfed by his. He's a biochemical engineer, as you know. Anyway, he had one of the same comorbidities that I did. And I thought, I got to listen to this guy. So anyway, after I did that, I thought I need to share this with my brother and sister, fellow human beings. And so I had been chronicling all of my information and my research. And so I decided to write a book about it. And that book turned into, it's called Unholy Trinity. You can see it behind me. How carbs, sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip. How carbs, sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip, because they are addictive. And look, I had to go through a lot of that too. See, I think of the book as a kind of a how-to book on how I went through all this science, and then I was able to reverse these 4 comorbidities and, that kind of thing. And I really get into it. I wrote it for the average reader of health and wellness. I didn't write it for doctors, even though they need it more than anybody, because they're clinicians. They're the ones that are helping these people. And it's like the blind leading the blind in some cases, not all cases. And I don't want to demean doctors because, they've saved my life and many times, they're 24-hour heroes too, right? They're setting the bone and suturing the wounds and removing bullets and steering wheels from our chest. So I love all of them. Even my older daughter, Chloe, has been working in the ER for, 10 years now. So I talk to her about this stuff all the time. But anyway, so it's that. And plus it's a bit of an expose on big food, big pharma, and big medicine, which I call the other unholy trinity. And then finally, it's what you might call a situation and data evaluation and analysis of this. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%. We are now approaching in the United States 50% in under 100 years. Never before in human history has a population gotten so fat and so sick so quickly. You got to say, what the hell is happening? When you pull the strings and you do the analysis, it's the arrival of the unholy trinity, the carbs, sugar, and oils, which I'll explain in detail, in the 20th century, because we didn't have them prior to that in the amounts and the concentrations that were introduced in the 20th century, right? Like that. So how's that for an opener?
No, that's a great opener. And your book was recommended to me actually by somebody I was on a podcast with, and it was just fortuitous that we connected.
This is great.
So yeah. Now, you've immediately pricked my interest by saying the doctors didn't do the right testing. Now, maybe we're shortcutting your story, but anyone that knows me, if I hear a phrase like that, wow, that's really provocative. So what are the testing that the doctors aren't doing, and why should we be doing those tests?
Well, you know, all this, everything I'm going to answer you and all your questions and everything is going to involve the book because that's
Yeah,
who I
no, it's
became.
fine.
And I went from having these comorbidities and almost dying to uh, Mr. Metabolical Health, right? um, well, basically, just before my heart attack, I had just passed a stress test with flying colors. So there's a whole other thing in that. See, I get into very deeply into the cardiovascular disease in chapter 17, 18, 19, and 20. If anybody's into that, everybody should be, because it's the biggest killer of human beings, as you well know. And so I go into it. I learned a lot from Ivor. He pointed me a lot into the right direction with several studies that, when I say studies, I see my book has more scientific references, citations, and so forth than any other health and wellness book out there. I mean, if they have any, they'll have 200 or 300. Mine has 1,227. And that was an extra 150 hours right there, as you know, because you're an author. It takes a long time to put all that together. But I knew there were going to be people who say, hey, well, you're not a doctor or a scientist. Why the hell should I trust you? And I tell them, don't. None of this is my opinion. Just think of me as a friendly relay point of what the best of 21st century science has to offer for your health and wellness, and fix yourself. I did. You can too. And again, none of it's my opinion. And these are all RCTs and, randomized controlled trials. I made sure I didn't pay any attention to studies that have funding from big food, big pharma, and big medicine, because there's, in all three, I'm sure they're beautiful, wonderful people, but in big food alone, as you know, they have these biochemical geniuses and PhDs in their conference rooms and labs around the planet. And they're trying to figure out, okay, so what can we put in their products that makes them eat more of it? They'll eat the whole bag instead of half the bag and make them addicted to it. And I don't know if you know this, but in the 80s, the big tobacco companies, smoking was going down. And they said, okay, so how can we expand? They were buying up the big food companies. They bought Kraft, Nabisco, General Foods, and they brought their addiction scientists over to these big food companies. And when I say addiction scientists, I'm not talking about curing addiction. I'm talking about how do we get them to eat more of the product. It's more for a bottom line and profits as opposed to what's good for human beings. So, anyway, it continues like that to this day. It's just, it's pretty wild. And so, besides, see, what happened was, to me, I found out through the research, there were several doctors that I hooked up with, and I was asking them a lot of questions. I told them I'm writing a book, and I found out about this one doctor. His name was Dr. Ford Brewer. And back then, this is, 4 or 5 years ago, his videos were pretty complicated, but you have to be able to learn the terminology and nomenclature of anything you're studying. You know that. If you don't know, what is the old saying? If you don't know the notes, you can't play the tune. If you don't know the tune, if you can't whistle the tune if you don't know the notes. And so I was very fortunate early on to learn how to study well and master dictionaries and that kind of thing. And if I was really interested in, not that I was a brilliant, great A student, but I could master anything that I was truly interested in. And that can be a painstaking process. But these days we have these things and we could say, hey, Siri, what's the definition of the word catheter or cardiovascular disease or whatever, And then she gives it to you. And it
is a medical device that can be inserted in the body to treat diseases or perform a surgical procedure. It is
a live demonstration.
Anyway, I wasn't expecting. I thought I had it silenced. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so
that's okay.
Hard to have a third person on our interview. But anyway, the more you do that, the less you have to do it, right? Because you learn that one and you learn the other one, and your vocabulary shoots out the roof, and so does your IQ. So it's really a valuable thing to do, to learn new words. And whenever you're reading anything, whether it's the news or, that kind of thing. And so I found that very useful because I reached out to this Dr. Ford Brewer and I said, look, because he's out of Johns Hopkins. He's taught and trained thousands of doctors, and he's brilliant at all of these testing, right? And I said, would you write a chapter in my book that delineates what are the most important blood labs and scans that anyone can get online without needing a doctor's prescription? And that way you yourself can find out if you've got something lurking, ready to pounce, or you're just fine, or somewhere in between that needs attention. And it's so important because, if you're over 40 or overweight, one or the other, you need to find out what's going on inside you, because these are most of the diseases of modernity that are killing us are silent diseases like heart disease. Check out this stat. 60% of the people who die of a first deadly heart attack, their very first symptom of having heart disease was their own death. It's like, what? So, most people think like I did, oh, if there's something wrong, I'll have some symptoms. I'll go to the doctor. He's got a white jacket. He'll be able to fix me and send me on my way. It's not that way at all, folks. You really have to take it upon yourself to find out, and you got to get the testing, because sometimes what'll happen is if you go to your doctor and say, hey, doc, I heard about this test, and I'd like to get that one and this other one that I heard about. And if you've got one of these doctors that has a coffee cup or a sign that says, don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree. So if you've got one of those guys, he might say, you don't need it. You don't need it. You don't need that test. And the only reason he's saying is because he doesn't know what it is and wouldn't know how to analyze the results anyway. So, unfortunately, not all of them, some of them, but they found, here's a shocking statistic. You'll appreciate this. This is out of Johns Hopkins, which is, as you know, it's a very prestigious East Coast of the United States medical hospital. And they found, this is just a couple of years ago, they did a big study and they found that 74% of doctors, now we're talking general practitioners, family physicians, internists, and cardiologists, 74% do not know how to properly diagnose and test for prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. It's like, are you kidding me? That's our biggest epidemic right now. And the reason for that is because most doctors, what they'll do is they'll test fasting blood glucose or A1C. And even the American Diabetes Association, which I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw them, even they say, hey, you're going to miss a lot of people if you only do those two, and they don't do this other test, and that's where they miss it. And that's how I discovered. It's called the OGTT with insulin, oral glucose tolerance test with insulin. I covered in my Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is called The Most Important Health Test You've Never Had, because doctors don't order it. It's just amazing. And that was me. I was one of the 1% of the population that could be on the slim side, but still be a raging type 2 diabetic. And so when I did that test, that was a shock to me, because then I found other information about, there was this researcher, Dr. Joseph Kraft, and I found out about him through Ivor Cummins. And he actually went and met with him. And he passed a couple of years ago at the age of 98, I think it was, that kind of thing. And he was the one that had this book in the late 1970s, that far back. It was called The Diabetes Epidemic and You. And he was the one that discovered that if you have heart disease, you have some degree of a diabetic physiology. And his quote was something like, those with heart disease not connected with diabetes are simply undiagnosed. He discovered this. He had done thousands of autopsies, and he discovered that the process of diabetes is atherosclerotic. It starts in the arteries. And that starts with because, and I start explaining this, it's so important. On page 2 of chapter 1, I tell people, look, make sure you really understand like the first 8 or 9 pages of chapter 1, because that'll carry you a long way. And that is, you have to understand the two most important players in the processing of the food that you put in your mouth. And those are glucose or blood sugar and insulin. You eat something, your glucose, your blood sugar goes up, and the pancreas senses that. It secretes some insulin in order to bring it down, keep it at a safe range, and it's a normal, healthy procedure that goes on in life. But when you're eating the wrong foods, like the unholy trinity, and or too frequently, your blood glucose and insulin is going to be elevated hour after hour, day after day, week after week, and you're going to develop what's called insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. And hyperinsulinemia, for your audience, that's just a fancy term for, hyper, too much insulin. Emia means in the blood. Hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood. And that leads to inflammation. And, you develop your prediabetes and type 2 diabetes and your inflammation. And that's where everything starts to go to hell with the inflammation and turn on all of these major diseases of modernity, because they have found that the source root cause of all these major new diseases of modernity is having some degree of a diabetic physiology. Your heart attacks, strokes, certain cancers, PCOS, cataracts and blindness, Alzheimer's, the list goes on, amputations and so forth. And so, you have to find out where you are on that. And the way to do it is with this simple OGTT with insulin. So that I found out that was the source root cause of my cardiovascular disease, which led to my heart attack. And then I discovered through Ivor, and because I had mentioned him, he had the same thing as I did. He had this thing called elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. And most doctors don't test that. They'll test of the liver enzymes, they test ALP, AST, ALP. And they don't usually check the GGT. And the gamma glutamyl transferase is so important. And I don't know why the medical community hasn't caught on to what the life insurance companies have discovered. Life insurance companies, they have to know who to reject and who to accept. It's just money to them. That's why they're damn good at analyzing data and statistics. That's why they're the most successful companies since the 1600s, But anyway, so life insurance companies discovered that their number one predictor of all-cause mortality is having elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. It's like, what? Why don't the doctors know? Why doesn't the medical community know this? Anyway, I learned this because, Ivor was talking about in one of his videos about how he went to 3 different doctors and he couldn't find, so he had to roll up his sleeves and find out. So thank you, Ivor. Anyway, my GGT, I had NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And because I don't drink, no drugs, I'm already silly enough, as my daughters will surely attest. So anyway, so I had this elevated GGT, and that's usually from, the unholy trinity, especially what's called high fructose corn syrup, HFCS. And I didn't know anything about this. And I'm looking at my pantry. I'm going, it's there. It's in all these products. So you really have to clean out your pantry of anything that has any high fructose corn syrup in it. So that was another comorbidity. And so where are we now? So we have heart disease, the type 2 diabetes, heart disease, NAFLD, and then I had osteoporosis, which I have a whole chapter on that too, osteopenia, osteoporosis, and other bone issues. Because, these days with the push of the big food companies with the unholy trinity, they're finding those bone issues coming in younger and younger ages. There was a study that found even 30 to 50-year-olds are starting to get osteopenia, which is the first stage just before osteoporosis. Now, I know a lot of this information. This is mostly for your audience, of course. And so I took a deep dive into that. And so first thing you want to do in that regard is you want to get a DEXA scan, DEXA. And that way you can analyze, exactly what's going on with your bones. Because, well, since you're a coach, you probably know this too. There are these 2 things called, one's called osteoclasts with a C and osteoblasts with a B. The osteoclasts, they do what's called the cutting. I like to give this analogy where if you're remodeling your kitchen, you have to cut out some things and then you have to build up some things. The osteoclast with a C does the cutting, and the osteoblasts with a B does the building up. And it's a balanced process that goes on in life. And then, at a certain age, depending on what your diet and lifestyle has been, the osteoclasts continue to do their favorite thing, which is the cutting. But the osteoblasts, they want to take an early retirement. And you don't want to allow that. And so there are certain nutrients and certain things you can do to either prevent that or reverse it. And that's what I did. So there you got my whole 4. You want me to, how about if I clarify what I'm talking about with the unholy Trinity, what that is?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great answer. I could listen to you for hours. I'm interested in how you got to, all the information out, which is really good. Yes, of course, we'll talk more about the unholy Trinity. Don't worry about giving away too much information because people will buy the book. I'm absolutely convinced of that. So I asked you about the tests as well. And you said 4 tests. So I think we've got 2 of the tests.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of testing. I mean, you're a phlebotomist. So I'm really impressed with that. That's why people ask me, well, who do you have a good GP? I don't even have I can't read my labs now. So anyway, the ones that I needed, the ones that I found that were really important, for example, in the cardiovascular area, I have them all up on my website, by the way, too, at danieltrevor.com. So, and I'm not selling anything, or you could just go there to find out which ones, and because that way you can find out in your country, wherever you are around the world, what ones you want to ask your doctor for. First of all, OGTT with insulin, or just the OGTT, and then there's a male or female panel that I recommend that has a lot of different things in it that some doctors don't order, like the GGT and that kind of thing. But there are these other few that I call smoke detectors. One's called MPO, myeloperoxidase, LP Plaque 2, and then MACR, microalbumin creatinine ratio. And these are smoke detectors because what happens is, here's what happens in a heart attack. I won't get too sciencey on you, but, after eating the unholy Trinity for too long, you build up these, what's called small, dense LDL particles that invade the artery wall through a process called transcytosis. They get stuck in this area called the intima media space in your arteries. And then you start taking friendly fire from your immune system with, monocytes and neutrophils and macrophage, foam cells, and so forth. And that builds up what's called small, dense LDL. Soft inflamed liquid plaque. So this liquid plaque, this soft inflamed plaque, is what causes heart attacks and strokes. What happens is, under a time of stress, after you have enough of this plaque underneath, whether it's mental, physical, or both, that soft plaque that's subendothelial below the artery can rupture through the already damaged endothelium, the lining of the artery wall. It spills into the lumen where the blood flows. It touches blood, creates a clot. It breaks off and goes downstream, so to speak. And if it goes to your heart, you have a heart attack. If it goes to your brain, you have a stroke, which tells you it could be a lot of different places it doesn't start in your heart. It could be in different junction points of where cardiovascular avenues meet up. And so just testing for those 3, you can find out if you've got that inflamed liquid plaque there. There are other tests too. You get the CIMT, carotid intima media thickness test, which is an amazing test. And then you also want to get what's called these are the ones that even cardiologists don't even check. It's called either a lipoprotein fractionation study or NMR lipoprofile, nuclear magnetic resonance lipoprofile. And because they only look at LDL. They go crazy over LDL, right? And they never break it down. There's pattern A, LDL, and there's pattern B. The pattern A is the large, buoyant, fluffy, benign LDL. And it's the pattern B, which is the small, dense LDL, nasty, born to be wild particles, right? So they never break that down. They don't know, do I have a lot of particle B, or do I, the analogy that I give in the book is, let's say your artery, think of your arteries as a cobblestone street, which has a lot of cracks and crevices and that kind of thing. And if you throw out some light beach balls, they'll just bounce around freely and, that kind of thing, right? Whereas if you threw out some marbles, they would get caught in the cracks and crevices and then eventually make their way subendothelial below the arteries and get stuck there and build up this plaque over time. And so that's basically what happens in a heart attack. And you want to be able to detect that with blood tests or these other scans. And of course, the CAC scan is Ivor probably talked to you about that. The CAC is coronary artery calcium scan or coronary artery calcium score. And the reason why that's an important one is because, and these two studies I'm about to tell you about, wow, they're just in the past couple of years. And I was so fortunate to be able to get them into the book, because I even say to the book, these are cutting edge information, because it takes so long for new science to get to the front lines of the doctors, let alone how long it takes to get to the medical curriculum of the schools, right? And the one study was was out of the American Academy of Cardiology, which is the top school on the planet for cardiology. It was the Honda study. And they had, they looked at the soft plaque, which they call echolucent, and then the calcified plaque, which is echogenic. And they discovered that all of the heart attacks and strokes were coming from the ones with the echolucent, the soft plaque. And then you go over to the CAC, and there's that carotid intermediate thickness test is the one that detects the soft plaque. But when you go to the CAC scan, Cleveland Clinic, which is ranked #1 globally for cardiovascular care, they had a new study. That's why I was saying I was fortunate to get it in, that showed that they calculated that if you have a positive score, meaning you're a CAC score, which is not good, like whether it's 100, 200, 300 or beyond, you have 4 times as much soft inflamed plaque than you do the calcified plaque. And they say, look, this is really where the trouble is. The most important thing is the soft plaque, because that's where the danger is. They said, just think of the calcified plaque as the tip of the iceberg, but it's below the surface, which is where all the danger is. And that's where the soft plaque is, right? And that's a good analogy, because that's what took down the Titanic. There was no damage to the upper levels. It was all underneath that's where the hole got ripped open and everything like that. So it's a good analogy. And they also discovered, and these are new studies too. See, a lot of people think that, oh, well, if I got a high score and my CAC score, and I'm going to get myself into good shape. I'm going to, and they spend a year or so, drop 30 pounds, get to the gym, stop eating the unholy Trinity and all the junk. And they think they're going to take a victory lap around because it's going to go way down. It's not what happens. Your score can go up. And they're calling this now the CAC paradox, or the plaque density paradox. Now, the doctors and researchers involved in the study, it wasn't a paradox to them because they figured it all out, which I'll tell you. But they knew it would be puzzling for the patients. What? My score's gone up, but wait, I did this and I did this, and I'm at the gym. I stopped eating the Fruit Loops and everything else. And what can happen is, see, I'm the perfect example of the CAC paradox. After my heart attack, I found all these geniuses that are on the cutting edge of modern medical science. I thought, I need to get a lot of tests done to find out the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that way I'd have a benchmark so I could measure my progress, 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. And my score, when I took mine, I had an abysmal 600. So right there, that tells you I'm in big trouble. And there's a lot more soft, dangerous plaque than that. And so the reason for that is because the body secretes or creates calcium in order to heal the lesions that are created by the soft, inflamed, dangerous plaque that causes heart attacks and strokes. And so what can happen is, depending on the amount that you have, your score can go up. Mine went from 600, and about a year and a half later, I decided to get it again, and it went to over 2,500. I said, wait, how could this be? I had already known by this time. I said, well, let me just check out this, see what this was like. And so I did that, but I confirmed that all my other tests were like brilliant. You know, I was like, I had my labs that made me look like a fit and chiseled 25-year-old, right? Because my HDL went into the 90s, my triglycerides went into the 30s, and you know, these are numbers that you know about, and they're exceptional, and everything else. So I knew this science, and it was right there. So don't freak out if your calcium score goes up instead of down.
Cool. That's excellent. I didn't want to interrupt because you were in the flow there. The Plaque test, PLAC2 test, is something that I mentioned in my book quite a bit.
Wow.
I'm glad you mentioned the damage to the endothelium is the start of the process, because I think that brings us on really nicely to the Holy Trinity. Because obviously the damage is the start, really. Tell us a bit more about how you arrived at the Holy Trinity as being problematic.
Well, first of all, since you just brought that up insofar as the glycocalyx and everything, where I didn't mention that, the lining of the arteries, but where all the nonsense started and the false data and fake science was back in the 50s when Eisenhower had a heart attack, President Eisenhower. And it was a big deal because a lot of people at that time were dropping in the prime of their life. And I have a lot of, in my book, I have a lot of charts and graphs and images and photos and that kind of thing. I want to make it easier for the reader to understand what's going on. And in chapter 1, I have first couple of chapters, I like to tell how did we get here? I have a chart that shows the rate of heart disease, like this. Here's 1900 and here's 1955, right? And so, and when you look back there, the heart disease was going on like that. See, smoking was an epidemic back then, right? It started just going up. Eisenhower was 3 packs a day. And then years later, they discovered this thing, or they developed this technology called electron microscopy, where they can snake up these little teeny tiny cameras into the arteries to find out what's going on, have a look. And they discovered at that time this thing called the glycocalyx. What is that? The glycocalyx, turns out it's the first line of defense. It's this fuzz-like lining of the artery wall, and it acts as the first line of defense against what's called small dense LDL particles that we talked about, and keep them from invading the artery wall and that kind of thing and causing all the damage. And what they discovered was smoking destroys the glycocalyx. Of course, with the epidemic of smoking, that's what happened. And then, this joker, which I'm sure you know about, Ansel Keys, came along, and he had this theory that it was the meat and the butter and the cheese, and it was clogging up the arteries. And it wasn't that way at all. It was just a bunch of fake science. It actually, the plaque stores up underneath the artery. Anyway, he had it all wrong. But people bought into it. He had this analogy where it was like a shower drain with the soap and the grease and the hair and the gook, and it would all clog up. It's not that way at all, right? So, but the people bought into that. And there was a guy in the UK at the same time, Dr. Yudkin, Yudkin, and he was trying to bring the attention to the fact that it was the sugar and the carbs that were causing the problem. But, oh no, United States has the better technology or something. And he even had a book in the early, I think it was 72, Pure, White, and Deadly, I think he called it, this Dr. Yudkin. Anyway, so about 10 years later, Big Food got onto it, and they started removing all the fat from their products, which makes them taste delicious, right? But they started adding in the carbs and the sugar to make it more palatable. What's another destroyer, an even worse destroyer of the glycocalyx? The carbohydrates contained in grains and sugars. That's even worse. So we went from one destroyer of the glycocalyx to something that's even worse. And then, anyway, that continues. And then by the 70s, we had the food pyramid. And so for 70 years, we've been lied to and that kind of thing. And thank God there's a lot of doctors and people like yourself that are getting a grip on metabolic health and where all this comes from. The unholy trinity. When I say carbs, sugar, and oils, the carbs, I'm talking about your refined and industrially processed grains, which they turn into powders, which they turn into bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, tortillas, and on that way, right? And then you have your candy, cake, ice cream, soda, fruit juice, pastries, which is a combination of the sugar and the grains, and on that way. And then the oils, we're talking about the vegetable oils. And some of them are okay, like authentic olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, that kind of thing. But there's 8 or 9 that are just deadly. And I have a whole chapter on that. The shocking truth about vegetable oils. I mean, because it sounds great. Hey, vegetable oils, right? And it turns out that these, and what I'm talking about is things like soybean oil, sunflower, safflower, canola, that kind of thing. And when you heat those up, when you cook with them, and especially the evil that it causes when you eat fruit from fast food, they have these chemicals. One's TBHQ, and then there's HNE, 4-hydroxynonenal. And these things are aldehydes, which are also in cigarettes. And these seed oils are carcinogenic, neurodegenerative, and they're 7 to 10 times more likely to cause heart disease. It's like, what? And yet, and then Kate Shanahan, who labeled them the Hateful Eight, she's a New York Times bestselling author, and she's really took the big dive into that. Even she, her study showed that the amount of toxins in one French fry from one of these fast food places contains as much toxins as one cigarette. So you got one French fry and one cigarette. It's like, wow. So there's definitely reasons to stay away from these things. And so that's the unholy trinity in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, there's a big pushback trying to defend seed oils, which I find absolutely ludicrous. No, there's no science there, and there's no common sense there either. I think the 3 you've identified, you could just step back and look at the introduction of the food guidelines, or you could look at consumption of fat, saturated fat, animal products, and dairy going down, and then consumption of your 3 going up. I know it's an association, but it's a pretty big one. And the increase in all the diseases going up in such a convincing way that it's hard to think it's anything else. That's how I would look at it, very unscientifically. But then when you get into the science, it all makes sense as well. I mean, the glycocalyx is something I think not discussed very much, but you're right. It was only technology that revealed it. And I think the internal workings of the artery, pretty fascinating. I'm just doing a little snapshot introduction to you. So, I mean, I'm not going to do a big sort of hour and get really deep into the science. I think your book is obviously sort of a work of passion at first because it happened to you. But secondly,
right.
But secondly, it is information that it sounds like it's quite, no pun intended, quite digestible, and you can dive into it and out of it if you want to look at one thing. One of the things I'll run past you, because I believe that the calcification in the artery is actually nature's stent. I think it is trying to do that. That's have you come across that theory?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what they found in Cleveland Clinic. They said, look, the body emits or puts out calcium to heal the lesions caused by the soft inflamed plaque. So that's why they say, look, if you're doing all the right things for a period of time, you drop 30 pounds and you get into the gym and you remove the Holy Trinity, or at least you're not eating the junk anymore, then you are going to stop the production of the small, dense LDL particles, which causes the plaque, as well as, you're going to calcify, because they said the reason why it's so important is that it stabilizes the plaque. It stabilizes it. I mean, you still have the plaque, but it's stable. You're not in danger anymore. And, it's interesting. There were 3 large studies. I think you'd enjoy this, and your audience too. There was this one large study called the ischemia trial, and it was a large $100 million government-funded trial, and they wanted to find out, and they had, it was a randomized controlled trial, RCT, and they had 2 groups, and it involved, 5,187 patients. And group 1, they gave them invasive procedures, and that's CABG, coronary artery bypass graft, or PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, which is a stent. So they either got open heart surgery with, bypass, or they got a stent. The other group, they sent them in the direction of lifestyle changes, drop 30 pounds, get back to the gym, stop eating the Fritos and all the junk. And they followed them closely for 4 years. And the reason why they did this is because, they really wanted to prove that these invasive procedures were the shit. They were the real deal, because there's so much of an enormous amount of revenue behind them. That's how they build the new wing of the hospital, all that revenue, right? And they really wanted to prove that this was the real deal, not this silly lifestyle stuff, right? And they followed them close. The group spoke closely for 4 years, and they found no difference. In other words, and they even said the ischemia trial failed to show that these, procedures were any good at preventing heart attacks and strokes. And, I bet that if they would have put those lifestyle group on, let's say, a low carb, keto, carnivore type diet, they would have outperformed the other ones by far. But that's looking retrospectively. So anyway, and there were other trials that were just like it. The Orbita trial, there was another one, I can't remember the name of it right now. But anyway, they were the same failures. And so I asked this reading book, I said, do you think after these failures that these procedures will start to, maybe not come to a halt, but at least slow down? The chart's like this. It's going off the roof. There's so much revenue. There's no way that the CEO of the hospital and the cardiology clinic is going to see that all that revenue disappear, because there goes their house on the beach, and there goes their kids in Ivy League college and their Mercedes. It would just change everything. And these 3 studies did rock the cardiology community, but there's nobody slowing it down there. So if you have your cardiologist saying, hey, I think we should do a stent, show him these studies that I have in chapter 17, and then he'll know that the truth. And then ask him, hey, so tell me again why you think we should do this. It's like, anyway, so I thought you'd like to hear about those 3 studies.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I love all that. So I'm going to finish with a question which many people will say, well, why didn't you ask this at the beginning? But I wanted to do it this way round because we have something in common, because my coronary artery calcium scan was 639, and I thought I was Mr. Healthy, right? And I can tell you that allegedly, if you look at the food guidelines, I should have been the poster boy. So you thought you were healthy and you had a heart attack, which is obviously even worse. What were you doing that made you think you were healthy? What was you eating?
Well, the thing that was the killer for me, and I'll tell you the reason why I thought it was healthy, is because, I would always hear people complain of aches and pains and all that. I didn't have any aches and pains. I had no symptoms of anything. Not the liver, not the bones, not the heart, because usually, you hear people and, they have chest pains, angina, and it's just not like that. There's no clouds before the storm, right? So what happened to me was I was totally sold on the propaganda and the bullshit of, air quotes, heart healthy whole grains. And I didn't know that these so-called heart healthy whole grains, they turn into sugar when you put them in your body. I didn't know any of that. And I didn't know that wheat raises the blood sugar higher than table sugar, even higher than a Snickers bar. And I didn't know any of that. And so, that's why I have a whole chapter on wheat, because it's called, Are You a Wheat Addict? And that's because, and so some of these things would have, like I'd start in the day, I'd have a granola that had maybe, 60 grams of carbohydrates, like a ton, maybe with some HFCS, high fructose corn syrup, And, and then I'd have my 2 slices of heart healthy whole grains with lunch with my low fat turkey sandwich, and so on. And I didn't know that anything about that and the glycemic, and, I just didn't know any of that. So anyway, the reason why I think I held off for so long from having the heart attack is because I always seemed to make it to the gym. I always thought it was, I should make it there 3 times a week. So, and I did that, and that pushes it off because, I cover there's a lot of great data in that you would like in chapter 9. It's all about exercise. And there's this thing it's very important. See, as we age, we naturally, the insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes and prediabetes, it goes like this from the teens, and it goes like this, your 50s, 60s, and it goes like this, right? And that's because of all the glucose and the insulin. You get hyperinsulinemia as you age. And researchers came across this thing. It's called what do they call it? The muscle glucose uptake. And what that is when you exercise, you do some biceps, triceps, your calf muscles, whatever. You pull glucose out of the arteries where it can do a lot of damage, and you pull it into the muscles where it can be used as energy, which is just brilliant. And that's why there's this another study that I have in chapter 9. It's a big study. It was like 95. It's a meta-analysis of 95 studies. And they found that, and it's for people, they wanted to know, what's the best exercise for people over 40? Is it resistance training, or is it cardio and aerobics, that kind of thing? And they did this big study, and they found that by far, and they compared the difference between they followed for 4 months. They compared it between, the cardio and the aerobics and the resistance training with weights of the machines. And they measured it against all the metabolic markers like HDL, triglycerides, A1C, and that kind of thing. And I show this graph. It's just amazing. The amount of benefits for people over 40 doing resistance training is tremendously better than the aerobics. And I think that's because of that, because you're drawing all the glucose out of the arteries where it can do so much damage and bring on disease, and you bring it into your muscles. So anyway, it's, I think you'll like the chapter there too.
Thank you. So Daniel, where can people get your book?
Well, first of all, you can go to danieltrevor.com, and I have a lot of information there, and also what I offer is, if you want, you can sign up to get on my newsletter. Once a week, I send out something, and you can unsubscribe at any time. And what I do is, once you sign up, you immediately are sent a PDF of the first 48 pages for free. I just want to, I'm very open to, you want to taste it, see if you like it, then you buy some more, So do that. Go to my website, danieltrevor.com. You can sign up and get that. And you can also see, I have a 7-minute video near the top of the page. It tells my story and all that kind of thing. And then you can see all these amazing endorsements I was able to get. It's like, I didn't know if I had anything good. So I started reaching out to these world-class opinion leaders. And oh my God, I got all these New York Times bestselling authors, cardiologists. I even have Dr. Philip Ovadia, who's a cardiologist. He's done over 3,200 heart surgeries, and he's a carnivore. And I even have the winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discovery of nitric oxide. Oh my God. So I thought, wow, I really have something important here, and I need to get it out. And as you know, as an author, you don't make much money writing health books at all, but I become wealthy in my heart knowing that, hearing from people all over the planet, because it's an international bestseller now, that, hey, this has really helped me. It's changed my life, and this and that. I think that's where I get my reward from. And I'm sure you have the same viewpoint.
Oh, yeah. I just want to spread the word. I mean, every book I've written has been based on the fact that so many people have asked me, and I've kept repeating the same answer. I thought, I need to just put this in a book form because it's going to help people.
Brilliant.
I'm going to do a bonus question, actually, which I very rarely do. what are your views on people that have the worries about their heart taking D3 and K2 as a supplement? Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, they're very important. Yeah, especially where you are. You don't get as much sun as we do over here. And the most recent studies, one of the guys that wrote me a great endorsement was this Dr. Eric Berg. And he's done a lot of study on D3, the original studies and things that were suppressed. He says, listen, you could just take up to, 10,000 units a day. Because now I think the recommended daily allowance is 400 or 500. It's just crazy. So, it's really important to that. And K2 has so many benefits. And I cover that also in the chapter on osteopenia, osteoporosis, and bone issues, because that really helps stop the osteoclasts from doing your thing. And I give all the studies there and everything. So yeah, no, those two are brilliant. I definitely take those. No doubt about it, as they say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.